I learned that morning that innocence and guilt wear the same face, and that the heart can be the greatest deceiver of all. The newspaper trembled in my hands as I read the words that would unravel everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the man I had never stopped believing in. Lady Iris Pembroke was dead, strangled in her own drawing room on the night of the Blackwood ball, while 200 guests danced 3 floors below. The Times reported it with the cold precision of men who had never known her laughter, never seen the way she moved through a room like light through stained glass. But I had known her, distantly, the way one knows all the luminous creatures of Mayfair when one exists only in their periphery. I set down my teacup, the china rattling against the saucer. Lady Hartley glanced up from her correspondence, her elderly eyes sharp despite the years. "You are pale, Eleanor. The news has disturbed you." I folded the paper carefully, as though order could contain chaos. "Lady Pembroke was very young," I said quietly. 23. The same age I had been when my father died, and left us with nothing but debts and the cold charity of distant relations. Lady Hartley made a small sound of acknowledgement. "Youth is no shield against wickedness, my dear. The police have made an arrest already. The Duke of Greystone, if you can believe such a thing. I always said there was something peculiar about that family." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling the blood drain from my face. "Adrian," I whispered, before I could stop myself. Lady Hartley's gaze sharpened. "You know him." It was not a question. I had been in her service for 3 years, a ghostly presence in her Mayfair household, and she knew almost nothing of my past. I preferred it that way. The fall from grace is only bearable when no one remembers the height from which you fell. "Our families were acquainted," I said carefully once. "Before my father's passing, before the bankruptcy, before the scandal, before I became what I am now, a paid companion with no prospects and no future, invisible to the world that once welcomed me." Lady Hartley studied me with the expression of someone who has lived long enough to recognize heartbreak in all its forms. "You do not believe him capable." I met her eyes. "I do not," I said. She sighed and returned to her letters. "Then you are either very wise or very foolish, Eleanor. Time will reveal which." But I could not sit still. I could not embroider or read or pretend that the world had not shifted beneath my feet. I excused myself and climbed the stairs to my small room on the 3rd floor, where the wallpaper was faded and the window looked out over the mews. I shut the door and pressed my back against it, closing my eyes. Adrian. Adrian Harcourt, Duke of Greystone. The boy who had taught me to skip stones across the lake at Greystone Hall when I was 12 and he was 15. The young man who had found me weeping in the garden the night my mother told me we were ruined, who had said nothing but simply sat beside me until the moon rose. The man whose engagement to Lady Iris Pembroke had been announced 6 months ago, then mysteriously dissolved in whispers and speculation. I had not seen him in 5 years, not since the day I left our country neighborhood and came to London to disappear into servitude. I had heard of him, of course. One always hears of dukes, his coldness, his pride, his refusal to marry despite the endless parade of eligible young women thrust into his path. And then, suddenly, Iris Pembroke. Beautiful, clever, captivating Iris, who seemed to thaw even his frozen reserve. Until she did not. I opened my eyes and moved to the window. Below, the city churned with its usual chaos. Carriages rattled over cobblestones. Vendors called their wares. Somewhere in this gray labyrinth, Adrian sat in a cell, accused of murder. And I, who had nothing and no one, who was less than nothing in the eyes of society, knew with absolute certainty that he was innocent. But certainty is not evidence, and innocence, I was learning, is no defense against appearance. I spent that evening in a fog of distraction, barely hearing Lady Hartley's commentary on the dinner, her complaints about the new scullery maid, her musings on whether to attend the Pembroke funeral. When she finally retired, I sat alone in the dim drawing room, watching the fire die to embers. The next morning, I asked Lady Hartley for permission to visit an old acquaintance. She regarded me with surprise. "You have never requested such a thing before." I kept my voice steady. "The circumstances are unusual." She waved a hand in consent, though her expression remained curious. I dressed in my most respectable gown, a gray wool that had seen better years but was clean and well mended, and made my way through the foggy streets to the offices of Inspector Chief Graves. I knew his name from the newspapers. I knew he was the man leading the investigation, and I knew that if I was to help Adrian, I needed to understand exactly what evidence had condemned him. The station was a grim stone building that smelled of damp and despair. I gave my name to the constable at the desk and waited on a hard wooden bench, surrounded by the sounds of distant shouting and the scratch of pen on paper. After 20 minutes, I was shown into a cramped office where Inspector Graves sat behind a desk piled with files and ash from his pipe. He was perhaps 50, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed. Miss Ashford. I confess I am surprised to receive a visit from a lady regarding this matter. I remained standing, though he had not offered me a chair. I wished to know the evidence against the Duke of Greystone. He leaned back, studying me. "And what is your interest in his grace?" "An old family acquaintance," I said. "I do not believe him guilty." Graves smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Belief is a luxury, Miss Ashford. I deal in facts, and the facts are these. Lady Pembroke was killed between 10 and midnight on the night of the ball. The Duke was seen arguing with her earlier that evening. Their broken engagement was well known. He had motive, opportunity, and temperament. That is circumstantial," I said quietly. Graves opened a drawer and removed a small velvet pouch. He tipped its contents onto the desk. "This, Miss Ashford, is not circumstantial. It was a cufflink, gold, engraved with an intricate pattern of leaves and vines. And in the center, clearly visible even in the dim light of the office, were the initials A.H. My breath caught. "We found it beneath the sofa in Lady Pembroke's drawing room," Graves continued, "hidden, as though someone tried to retrieve it but failed in their haste. It is a family piece, we understand. Quite distinctive. The Duke confirmed it belongs to him." I stared at the gleaming metal, feeling the world narrow to that single damning object. "There must be an explanation," I whispered. "Indeed," Graves said dryly. "The explanation is that the Duke killed Lady Pembroke and lost his cufflink in the struggle. He will hang for it, Miss Ashford. I suggest you reconcile yourself to that fact and abandon whatever romantic notions you harbor about his character." He returned the cufflink to the pouch and dismissed me with a curt nod. I walked back through the fog, my mind spinning. The cufflink. I remembered it. I remembered the summer afternoon at Greystone Hall when Adrian's father had presented him with the set, made from gold that had been in the family for generations. Adrian had worn them proudly, though he was barely 16 and still gangly with youth. He would never have given them up willingly. He would never have forgotten them at a scene of violence, unless he had been there, unless everything I believed was wrong. I stopped in the middle of the street, heedless of the carriages and the crowds. The fog pressed close, muffling sound, turning the world into a gray dream. And in that moment, I made a choice that would define everything that followed. I would not abandon him. I would not let the evidence speak unopposed. I would find the truth, whatever it cost me, whatever it revealed, even if that truth destroyed the last innocent belief I carried in my heart. I began where all forgotten women begin, in the places no one sees. The servants' quarters, the back stairs, the kitchens where gossip flows more freely than wine at any grand ball. If there was truth to be found, it would not come from the drawing rooms of Mayfair, where every word is measured and every smile calculated. It would come from those who watched, who listened, who existed in the shadows as I did. Lady Hartley's household employed 12 servants. Among them was a girl named Mary, barely 16, whose sister worked in the Pembroke household. I found her in the scullery 2 days after my visit to Inspector Graves, her hands red from washing dishes in water too hot for comfort. "I need to know about Lady Pembroke," I said quietly, standing in the doorway where the housekeeper would not see me. "About the night she died." Mary's eyes widened with fear and something else, excitement perhaps. The young always hunger for drama, even when it wears the face of tragedy. "Miss, I should not speak of such things." I pressed a coin into her wet palm, more than I could afford but necessary. "Your sister was there that night. She must have seen something, heard something. I need to know." Mary glanced over her shoulder, then leaned close. Sarah said the house was in chaos after they found her. Lady Pembroke, I mean. But before that, everything seemed normal. The family had returned from the ball around midnight. Lady Pembroke went to her drawing room, said she wanted a moment alone. Sarah brought her tea at 12:30 and found her. My throat tightened. Was anyone else in the house? Mary nodded quickly. Lord Pembroke, her father, and her brother, Mr. Richard Pembroke. They were both home. And there was a visitor earlier in the evening, before the ball. Sarah heard raised voices from the library. A visitor. My pulse quickened. Did she see who it was? Mary shook her head. But she heard Lady Pembroke crying after he left. Crying something terrible, Sarah said. Like her heart was broken all over again. I thanked her and left before the housekeeper could discover us. The fog had thickened, turning afternoon into twilight. I walked without direction, letting my feet choose the path while my mind worked through what I had learned. A visitor before the ball, an argument, Iris in tears, and then, hours later, death. The next day, I did something I had sworn never to do. I went to the one place I had avoided for 5 years, the one corner of London where my past still lingered like a ghost. I went to the townhouse on Belgrave Square where Lady Catherine Ashford, my father's sister, held court over what remained of our family's social standing. The butler recognized me, though his expression revealed nothing. He showed me into the morning room, where my aunt sat surrounded by correspondence and the scent of hothouse roses. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment, something like pain crossed her face before it hardened into disapproval. Eleanor, I had not expected to see you again. I remained standing, my hands folded. I need information, Aunt Catherine, about Lady Iris Pembroke and the Duke of Greystone. She set down her pen with careful precision. You have no business involving yourself in such matters. You are a companion, Eleanor. You have no standing, no protection, no right to meddle in the affairs of your betters. The words stung, as they were meant to. But I had learned to carry pain the way one carries stones in a pocket, familiar and heavy. I know Adrian is innocent, I said. I know it in my bones, but I need to understand what happened between them. Why the engagement ended. Who might have wanted Iris dead? My aunt's expression shifted, something almost like pity entering her eyes. You still love him. It was not a question. I did not answer. She sighed and rose, moving to the window where gray light filtered through lace curtains. The engagement ended because Iris broke it off, she said quietly. 3 months ago, quite suddenly. There were rumors of another man, though no one could say who. Adrian was devastated, or as devastated as a man like him can appear. He withdrew from society entirely, refused all invitations, all calls. And Iris, she continued her life as though nothing had changed, brilliant as ever, sought after by every eligible man in London. But she was crying the night she died, I said. Someone broke her heart again. Catherine turned to face me. Eleanor, listen to me carefully. Adrian Harcourt is not the boy you remember. 5 years changes people, hardens them. He has become cold, withdrawn, capable of great anger when provoked. I have seen it myself. At the opera last season, when Lord Pembroke made some comment about the broken engagement, Adrian nearly struck him. It took 3 men to pull him away. I felt something crack inside my chest, but I kept my voice steady. That does not make him a murderer. No, my aunt agreed, but it makes him capable of violence. And capability, Eleanor, is often all that separates the innocent from the guilty when circumstances align. She moved closer, her hand reaching out as though to touch my face, then falling away. You cannot save him. You cannot even save yourself. Go back to Lady Hartley. Forget this foolishness. Let the law take its course. But I could not. That night, I lay awake in my narrow bed, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Carriages on cobblestones, a woman's laughter, high and false, the church bells marking midnight, and I thought about the boy who had sat beside me in the garden, who had said nothing because he understood that sometimes silence is the only kindness. I thought about the cufflink, gleaming and damning. I thought about Iris, beautiful and broken, crying over a man who had come to see her hours before her death. And I thought about what Mary had said, that Lord Pembroke and his son Richard had both been home that night, that they had both been there when Iris died. The next morning, I forged a letter of introduction from Lady Hartley. I am not proud of the deception, but necessity has a way of eroding principles. I took it to the Pembroke household and requested an audience with Lord Pembroke, claiming a connection through my employer that was tenuous at best, but not entirely fabricated. I was shown into a library that smelled of leather and tobacco and grief. Lord Pembroke was a man of perhaps 60, with silver hair and eyes red from weeping or drinking or both. He stood when I entered, confusion evident in his expression. "Miss Ashford, I confess I do not understand the nature of your visit." I curtsied and kept my voice gentle. "I wish to express Lady Hartley's condolences, my lord, and to offer any assistance we might provide during this terrible time." It was a flimsy excuse, and we both knew it. But grief makes people vulnerable, and the vulnerable sometimes speak truths they would otherwise guard. He gestured weakly to a chair, and I sat, my heart pounding. "The Duke will hang for what he did to my daughter," Lord Pembroke said, his voice breaking. "He will pay for taking her from us." I hesitated, then ventured carefully into dangerous waters. "Forgive me, my lord, but I have heard there were tensions between Lady Pembroke and his Grace, that the engagement ended badly." His face darkened. "She was too good for him, too bright, too alive. When she realized his true nature, she had the courage to end it, and he could not bear the rejection, could not bear that she had moved on, that she had found happiness elsewhere. Elsewhere. My breath caught. She had formed a new attachment? Lord Pembroke's eyes grew distant. She did not confide in me, but I saw the change in her, the light returning to her face, the letters she received and burned before anyone could read them. She was in love, Miss Ashford. Genuinely, deeply in love, and someone took that from her. I left the Pembroke house with more questions than answers, but one thing was becoming clear. Iris had loved someone else, someone secret, someone whose identity she had protected even from her family. And the night she died, someone had visited her, someone who made her cry. I walked through the fog toward Newgate, where Adrian awaited trial. I did not have permission to see him. I did not have standing or right or any claim at all. But I stood outside the grim stone walls and imagined him inside, cold and alone, accused of a crime I still refused to believe he had committed. The cufflink haunted me. It was there, undeniable, gleaming with guilt. But what if, I whispered to the fog, what if the evidence had been placed there? What if someone wanted Adrian to hang? The thought took root in my mind, like a seed in dark soil. And as I turned away from the prison, I knew that I would not stop until I found the truth. Even if that truth destroyed every last illusion I still carried about love, loyalty, and the man I had never quite learned to forget. The permission came from an unexpected source. 3 days after my visit to the Pembroke household, a letter arrived at Lady Hartley's address, sealed with the Greystone crest. My hands shook as I broke the wax and unfolded the heavy paper. It was not from Adrian, but from his solicitor, Mr. Blackwell, requesting my presence at Newgate Prison the following afternoon. The Duke of Greystone, it said, had learned of my inquiries and wished to speak with me. I told Lady Hartley I was visiting a distant cousin. The lie came easier than it should have, but then necessity had been teaching me many things I had never wished to learn. I dressed in my darkest gray, pinned my hair severely, and made my way through streets that grew progressively grimmer until I stood once more before those terrible stone walls. Mr. Blackwell met me in the entrance hall, a thin man with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested he had long since abandoned any illusions about justice or mercy. "Miss Ashford, His Grace has been most insistent about seeing you. I confess I advised against it, but he can be remarkably stubborn when his mind is fixed." I followed him through corridors that smelled of unwashed bodies and despair, past cells where men shouted or wept or sat in terrible silence. And then we stopped before a door somewhat apart from the others, and Mr. Blackwell unlocked it with a key that seemed too small for such a heavy barrier. Adrian stood as I entered. 5 years had changed him, as my aunt had warned. The gangly youth had become a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that had hardened into aristocratic severity. But his eyes, gray as winter rain, were the same. They held the same intelligence, the same careful observation, and now, the same barely contained emotion I remembered from that night in the garden when my world had ended. Eleanor. My name in his voice nearly broke me. I had not realized how much I had missed it, how much I had missed him, until that moment. Mr. Blackwell withdrew discreetly, leaving us alone in a stone room with a single chair and a narrow window too high to offer any view but gray sky. I moved toward him, then stopped, suddenly uncertain. 5 years and an accusation of murder stretched between us like an ocean. "I do not believe you killed her," I said, the words tumbling out before I could measure them. "I have never believed it. I will not believe it, regardless of what evidence they present." Something flickered across his face, too quick to name but painful to witness. "You should believe it, Eleanor. Everyone else does. Even my own solicitor looks at me as though I am already a ghost." He turned away, his shoulders rigid with tension. "I have been such a fool. I lost her, you see. Lost Iris, because I could not give her what she needed. And now they say I killed her for it. Killed her because I could not bear to see her happy with someone else. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps I am capable of such darkness." I crossed the distance between us without thinking and seized his arm, forcing him to face me. "Stop this. You are not a murderer, Adrian. I know you. I have always known you." His laugh was bitter. "You knew a boy, Eleanor. A boy who skipped stones and named constellations. You do not know the man I have become. Then tell me. Help me understand. What happened between you and Iris? Why did the engagement end?" He pulled away and moved to the narrow window, staring up at the slice of sky visible through the bars. "She wanted love," he said quietly. "The kind of love that consumes and transforms. The kind that makes you forget duty and propriety and everything you have been taught to value. And I," he continued, his voice dropping to something almost inaudible, "I could not give her that. Because my heart had been claimed years ago by someone I could never have." The air left my lungs. I gripped the back of the chair to steady myself. "Who?" He did not answer for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "It does not matter now. Iris realized the truth, or enough of it. She ended our engagement 3 months ago, quite rightly. She deserved better than a man who could only offer her half a heart. And she found someone who could love her completely, someone who made her radiant in ways I never did. Do you know who he was?" Adrian shook his head. "She would not tell me. We had become, if not friends, at least civil to one another. We spoke occasionally, at events where avoiding each other would have caused more scandal than meeting. 2 weeks before her death, she told me she was considering leaving England, starting over somewhere fresh. She was frightened, Eleanor. Frightened but determined. Of what? I do not know. She would not say. And then she was dead, and they found my cufflink beneath her sofa, and here I am, waiting to hang for a crime I did not commit." I moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to catch the scent of soap and something uniquely him that memory had preserved across 5 years of separation. "The cufflink," I said carefully. "You told the inspector it was yours. It is mine. I kept the pair in a case on my dressing table. I noticed one missing 3 days before Iris died. I assumed my valet had misplaced it, or that it had fallen and rolled somewhere. I never imagined it would be found at a murder scene. 3 days before. My mind raced through the implications. Someone took it from your home, someone who had access to your private chambers, someone who planned this carefully." Adrian turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw hope struggle against despair in his expression. "Why are you doing this, Eleanor? Why risk yourself for a man you have not seen in 5 years? You owe me nothing. Less than nothing, considering how we parted." I met his gaze, feeling my heart hammer against my ribs. "We did not part, Adrian. I left. I had no choice. My family was ruined, and I would not drag you down with me. But I never stopped. I hesitated, searching for words that would not reveal too much. I never stopped believing in the boy who sat beside me that night and asked for nothing." His hand reached up, fingers hovering near my face, but not quite touching, as though he was afraid I might disappear. "You haunted me," he whispered. "Every ballroom, every woman who smiled, Every moment I tried to convince myself I could build a life with Iris or anyone else. You were there, a ghost I could not exorcise, a memory I could not silence, and now you stand before me, solid and real, investigating a murder on my behalf when you should be running as far from this scandal as possible. I cannot run from you, I said, the confession escaping before wisdom could stop it. I never could. The moment stretched between us, charged with everything we had never said, everything 5 years and circumstance had stolen from us. Then footsteps echoed in the corridor, and Mr. Blackwell knocked to signal that our time was ending. Adrian's hand fell away. Find him, Eleanor. Find whoever killed Iris, not for me, but for her. She deserved better than to die frightened and alone. She deserved the love she had finally found. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and turned toward the door. Eleanor. I looked back. Be careful. Whoever did this is clever and ruthless. They have already destroyed one life. They will not hesitate to destroy another. The prison door closed behind me with a sound like finality. I stood in the gray afternoon, breathing fog and ash, feeling the weight of what I had learned and what I had confessed pressing down on my shoulders. Adrian had loved someone for years, someone he could never have, and I, foolish woman that I was, had allowed myself to hope it might have been me. But hope is dangerous. Hope makes you vulnerable. And I could not afford vulnerability when a murderer walked free, and the man I loved waited to hang for crimes he did not commit. I made my way back through Mayfair, past the grand houses where light spilled from windows and music drifted into the dusk. Somewhere in this glittering world of privilege and pretense, someone had stolen a cufflink and placed it at a murder scene. Someone with access to Greystone House. Someone with motive to see Adrian destroyed. And I realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with the November air, that I had been asking the wrong questions. I had been trying to understand who killed Iris and why. But the more important question, the question that would unlock everything, was simpler and more terrible. Who wanted Adrian to hang for it? Who hated him enough to plan such elaborate destruction? Who stood to gain from his death? I thought of Richard Pembroke, Iris's brother, who had been home that night. I thought of Lord Pembroke, who spoke of Adrian with such venom. I thought of all the men who had wanted Iris and lost her, all the women Adrian had rejected, all the debts and rivalries and ancient grudges that festered beneath the polished surface of society. The answer was there, hiding in plain sight among the gossip and the scandal and the carefully maintained lies, and I would find it, no matter the cost. Even if it meant discovering that the past I cherished was nothing but illusion, and that love, like innocence, was just another beautiful lie we tell ourselves to survive the darkness. I returned to Mary the next morning with more coins I could not spare and questions that burned on my tongue. She met me in the servants' courtyard behind Lady Hartley's house, her breath misting in the cold November air. Sarah, says Mr. Richard Pembroke has been strange since his sister died, she whispered, glancing nervously toward the kitchen door. Drinking heavily, shouting at the servants, locked in his room for hours. And there is something else, miss. Sarah found burnt letters in Lady Pembroke's fireplace the morning after she died. Someone had been in there before the police arrived, burning her correspondence. My pulse quickened. Could Sarah tell who the letters were from? Mary shook her head. Most were ash. But there was one fragment, just a corner really, with part of a signature. It looked like the letter G, and maybe an R. Sarah said nothing to the police because she was frightened. The family told the staff to speak to no one, threatened them with dismissal if they gossiped. GR. The initials circled in my mind as I walked toward Greystone House that afternoon. I had no appointment, no right to enter, but I had learned that confidence and a well-told lie can open doors that should remain closed. I presented myself at the servants' entrance and informed the housekeeper that I had been sent by Mr. Blackwell regarding His Grace's personal effects. It was a gamble, but grief and chaos make households careless. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Davies, looked exhausted and uncertain. She led me through the back corridors to Adrian's private chambers, a suite of rooms that smelled of leather and old books and the faint cologne I remembered from the prison visit. I have 10 minutes, miss, before the master's secretary returns. Mr. Blackwell should have sent word ahead. I nodded gravely and waited until her footsteps faded before moving quickly through the room. The dressing table held the case Adrian had mentioned, velvet-lined and empty except for the remaining cufflink. I examined it carefully. The pattern was indeed distinctive, the initials unmistakable. Anyone familiar with Adrian would recognize it immediately. I searched the rest of the room with growing urgency. Drawers of correspondence, all neatly filed. A writing desk with nothing unusual. And then, tucked behind a row of books on the lowest shelf, I found a small leather journal. My hands trembled as I opened it. The entries were sparse, written in Adrian's careful hand. Most were mundane observations about estate business or social obligations. But then, 3 months ago, the tone changed. The writing became more personal, more raw. She has ended it, one entry read. I am relieved and devastated in equal measure. Relieved that I no longer must pretend. Devastated that I have hurt her with my inability to become what she needed. E would understand, I think. E always understood the things I could not say. E. The initial burned into my consciousness. I forced myself to keep reading. 2 weeks later, another entry. Saw E's aunt today at the opera. She mentioned E is still in London, still serving as companion to Lady Hartley. So close, and yet I cannot reach across the chasm of class and circumstance. What right have I to disrupt her peace with confessions that can change nothing? The journal shook in my hands. E. Eleanor. He had been writing about me. All this time, he had been thinking of me, loving me from a distance, trapped by the same social barriers that had driven me away 5 years ago. Footsteps in the corridor jolted me back to danger. I replaced the journal and slipped out just as Mrs. Davies returned, making some excuse about needing to verify information with Mr. Blackwell's office. She looked suspicious, but allowed me to leave. I walked through Mayfair in a daze, barely seeing the carriages or the fashionable ladies with their maids. Adrian loved me, had loved me for years, and I had been so certain he could never see past my ruined status, never look at the impoverished companion I had become. But sentiment would not save him from the gallows. I forced my mind back to the investigation, to the fragments that did not yet form a complete picture. Gr. The burnt letters, Richard Pembroke's strange behavior, and the visitor who had made Iris cry hours before her death. That evening, I did something reckless. I went to the Blackwood Club, a gentleman's establishment where I had no business being. I stood in the fog across the street and waited until I saw Richard Pembroke emerge, already unsteady from drink. I followed him through the gaslit streets, keeping to the shadows, my heart pounding with fear and determination. He led me to a narrow street in Bloomsbury and entered a shabby townhouse. I waited 10 minutes, then approached the door. A woman answered, painted and weary, her dress too fine for the neighborhood, but worn at the seams. She looked me over with practiced assessment. "I am looking for Mr. Richard Pembroke," I said quietly. She laughed, a harsh sound. "Join the queue, love. He owes half of London money. If you are here to collect, I can tell you there is nothing left to take. I am not here for money. I am investigating his sister's death." Her expression shifted, something almost like pity entering her eyes. "Then you had better come in." She led me to a cramped parlor and poured 2 glasses of cheap gin without asking if I wanted one. "My name is Charlotte Green. I was Iris Pembroke's friend, though her family would die before admitting it. We met at a charity house 2 years ago when she was doing her good works among the poor. She saw through all my defenses, saw the girl I had been before life taught me what I had to become to survive." She took a long drink. "Iris fell in love with my brother George Green. He is a journalist, respectable enough but with no fortune, no title, nothing her family would accept. They kept their attachment secret for months. He made her happy, miss, truly happy. And then Richard found out. My breath caught. What did he do?" Charlotte's hands tightened around her glass. "He threatened to expose George, to ruin his reputation, to have him thrown in debtor's prison on false charges. Richard has always been cruel when thwarted, and he could not bear that his sister would choose a nobody over the advantages her beauty and breeding could secure. So Iris agreed to end it, to protect George. That is why she accepted the Duke's proposal. She thought she could learn to love him, or at least respect him enough to make a life, but she could not forget George. And 3 months ago? Charlotte met my eyes. George came back to London. He had been away, working for a newspaper in Edinburgh, trying to forget her. When he learned she was engaged, he wrote to her, begging her to reconsider. She broke off the engagement. They began meeting in secret again, planning to leave England together. Richard discovered it 2 weeks before she died. He went to Iris and told her he would destroy George completely if she did not end it again. But this time, Iris refused. She told Richard she would rather be disinherited than live without the man she loved. The pieces were falling into place, terrible and clear. Richard was home the night she died. Charlotte nodded slowly. George received a message that evening, supposedly from Iris, asking him to come to her drawing room at midnight. He went, but when he arrived, the servants told him Lady Pembroke was not receiving visitors. He left a note and departed. The next morning, we learned she was dead. And George, she said, her voice breaking, George has been destroyed by it. He believes she sent for him, and he failed her. He does not know the message was a forgery. Where is he now? Charlotte gestured toward the ceiling. Upstairs, drowning in guilt and gin, just like Richard Pembroke drowns in his own dark secrets. I climbed the narrow stairs and found George Green in a small room that smelled of alcohol and despair. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair and eyes that had once been kind but now held only anguish. I told him who I was and why I had come. At first he would not speak, but grief needs outlet. And I was patient. I loved her, he said finally. Loved her more than life. She was light and courage and everything good in this rotting world. And I could not save her. You could not have known, I said gently. The message was not from her. Someone lured you there to establish that you had been near the house. Someone who wanted to create confusion, or perhaps implicate you as another suspect. His head lifted. Richard. It had to be Richard. He hated that Iris chose me. Hated that she would defy him. But why kill her? Why not simply force her to submit as he had before? Because she would not submit this time, I said slowly, understanding crystallizing. She was leaving England. She was choosing love over family, over fortune, over everything Richard thought he could control. And Richard could not bear it. But the Duke's cufflink, George said. How does that fit? I thought of Adrian's journal, his careful notations about estate business and social calls, and I remembered something he had said in prison. 2 weeks before her death, she told me she was considering leaving England. 2 weeks. The same time Richard discovered Iris and George were planning to elope. The same time someone began planning a murder that would look like a crime of passion committed by a rejected suitor. Richard knew Adrian, I said. They moved in the same circles. Richard could have gained access to Greystone House during a social call, could have taken the cufflink then. He killed his own sister and framed Adrian for it, knowing the broken engagement would provide motive, knowing the evidence would seem irrefutable. The horror of it settled over us like ash. George covered his face with his hands. I need proof, I said. Something concrete to take to Inspector Graves. Letters, witnesses, anything that connects Richard to the crime. George looked up, and for the first time, something other than despair showed in his eyes. Charlotte, he called down the stairs. Bring the letters. The ones Iris gave you for safekeeping. Charlotte appeared with a bundle wrapped in ribbon. Letters in Iris's hand, addressed to George, detailing her brother's threats, his violence, his obsession with controlling her. And at the bottom, a note dated the day before her death. If something happens to me, Iris had written, Richard is responsible. He has sworn he will see me dead before he sees me disgraced. Please, my love, do not blame yourself. Live and be happy, and remember that I chose love even at the end. I held the letters against my chest, feeling their weight. Tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow I take these to Inspector Graves. Tomorrow we prove Richard Pembroke killed his sister and framed an innocent man. George gripped my hand. Thank you. Thank you for believing, for fighting, for not letting her death become just another scandal for society to gossip over. I walked home through fog so thick I could barely see 3 feet ahead. But my mind was clear. Richard had access, motive, and opportunity. He had stolen the cufflink, killed his sister when she defied him one final time, and planted the evidence that would hang Adrian. Tomorrow, the truth would come to light. Tomorrow, Justice would be served. But tonight, I allowed myself one moment of selfish hope. Tonight, I let myself imagine a world where Adrian walked free, where the barriers between us dissolved, where love was not a luxury reserved for those born to privilege. Tonight, I dared to dream that the girl who had loved a boy beside a lake might still find her way home to the man he had become. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the window of my small room, watching fog swirl through gaslit streets, holding Iris's letters against my heart like a talisman against darkness. At dawn, I dressed in my most severe gown and made my way to Inspector Graves's office before the city fully woke. He looked up from his desk with irritation that shifted to surprise when he saw what I carried. "Miss Ashford, I thought I made myself clear that your amateur investigations were unwelcome." I laid the bundle of letters before him without ceremony. Richard Pembroke murdered his sister. These letters prove motive. He threatened her repeatedly for loving a man beneath her station. The night she died, he killed her and planted the Duke's cufflink to frame an innocent man. Graves picked up the letters slowly, his expression skeptical. But as he read, I watched his face change. The irritation faded, replaced by something harder and more focused. When he finished, he looked at me with new respect. "Where did you obtain these?" "From Charlotte Green, sister of George Green, the man Iris Pembroke truly loved, the man Richard tried to destroy. You will find them both at the address I have written there. They will testify to Richard's threats, his violence, his obsession with controlling his sister." Graves stood, already reaching for his coat. "If this is true, Miss Ashford, and I will verify every word before I act, then you have accomplished what my entire department failed to do. You have found justice for a murdered woman." "Not I," I said quietly. "Iris found it herself. She knew her brother was dangerous. She left evidence because she understood that love, even dying, demands to be defended." 2 days later, Richard Pembroke was arrested at his club. I learned from the newspapers that he had confessed almost immediately, his guilt and his gin having eroded whatever strength he once possessed. He spoke of his sister's defiance, her willingness to disgrace the family for a common journalist, his rage at being unable to control her as he had controlled everything else in his life. He had visited her the evening before the ball, stolen into Greystone House during a social call weeks earlier, planned every detail with the cold precision of a man who believed his sister's life belonged to him to dispose of as he wished. The Duke of Greystone was released that same afternoon. I learned of it from Mary, who heard it from Sarah, who heard it from the Pembroke cook. I was in Lady Hartley's drawing room, pretending to read, when the news came. My hands began to shake so badly I had to set down the book. Lady Hartley observed me with her usual sharp awareness. "You care for him a great deal." It was not a question, but I answered anyway. "I have cared for him since I was 12 years old, and did not know what caring meant. I have loved him since I was 17, and learned that love is the thing that breaks us most beautifully. And now? Now I do not know if love is enough to cross the distance between who I am and who he needs beside him." Lady Hartley rose and moved to stand beside my chair. Her hand, papery and warm, touched my shoulder. "Eleanor, I have lived 83 years. I have seen empires fall and fortunes made and lost, and I have learned that love, true love, is the rarest and most precious thing in this world. If you have found it, if he has found it, then class and circumstance are merely obstacles to be overcome, not insurmountable walls. Go to him. Do not waste another 5 years in fear." But I did not need to go to him. That evening, as November rain began to fall and gaslight reflected in puddles, there was a knock at the servants' entrance. I answered it myself, and found Adrian standing in the rain, his coat soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes holding everything he had never been able to say. "Eleanor." We stood there, separated by the threshold, as rain fell around us. "May I come in? Or would that compromise you further?" I stepped back to let him enter, leading him through back corridors to the small parlor where Lady Hartley received tradesmen. It was hardly appropriate, but then, nothing about our situation had ever been appropriate. He stood in the center of the room, water pooling at his feet, and I realized he was trembling. "Mr. Blackwell told me everything you did. The investigation, the risks you took, the evidence you uncovered. You saved my life, Eleanor. And I have no words sufficient to express what that means to me. You do not need words, I said softly. You never did. He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands finding mine, gripping them as though I might disappear. I read my own journal in prison. The guards returned my personal effects. I saw what I had written about you, the confessions I thought no one would ever read. And I realized that I have been a coward. 5 years ago, when your father died, I should have come to you. I should have offered you everything I had. Damn the scandal, damn society's judgment. Instead, I let you vanish, let you believe I had forgotten you, when every day without you was a small death. Adrian, I whispered, feeling tears burn behind my eyes. I am a duke, Eleanor. I have wealth, position, power, and none of it means anything without you. These past 5 years, I have been half alive, going through motions, trying to convince myself I could build a life on duty alone. Even with Iris, kind and beautiful as she was, I could not escape the ghost of a girl who once sat beside me in a garden and let me grieve in silence. I cannot be your duchess, I said, though it cost me everything to speak the truth. I have no dowry, no family, no standing. I am a paid companion, Adrian. Society would destroy you for choosing me. His hands tightened on mine. Then let society destroy me. I have faced hanging, Eleanor. I have sat in a cell waiting for death and realized that the only thing I truly regret is not fighting for you when I had the chance. I will not make that mistake again. He released my hands and stepped back, then lowered himself to one knee on the worn carpet of Lady Hartley's servants' parlor. It was absurd and perfect and exactly like the man he had always been, the one who skipped stones and named stars and understood that true nobility has nothing to do with titles. Eleanor Ashford, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that love matters more than lineage? That you matter more than any opinion society might hold? I looked down at him, at this man who had been a boy who saved me from drowning, who had become a duke accused of murder, who now knelt before me offering everything he had. And I thought of Iris, who had chosen love even knowing it would cost her everything. I thought of her last letter, her plea to George to live and be happy. Yes, I said, the word barely more than a breath. Yes, Adrian, I will marry you. He stood and pulled me into his arms, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt whole. His lips found mine, gentle at first, then deeper, filled with all the longing and loss and love we had carried in silence. When we finally drew apart, we were both trembling. There will be scandal, I warned him. Your peers will reject me. Your family will be horrified. Let them be horrified. I have an excellent solicitor and more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. We will weather their judgment together. And eventually, Eleanor, they will see what I have always seen, that you are worth more than all their approval combined. Lady Hartley appeared in the doorway, unsurprised and smiling. I take it congratulations are in order? Adrian bowed to her with perfect courtesy. Lady Hartley, I am stealing your companion. I hope you will forgive me. She laughed, a sound of pure delight. My dear Duke, I have been waiting 3 years for someone to steal her. Eleanor is far too clever and far too kind to waste her life attending an old woman. Take her with my blessing and be happy. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, small and private, in the chapel at Greystone Hall. George Green and Charlotte were there, along with Lady Hartley and a handful of Adrian's closest friends, who cared more about his happiness than society's rules. My Aunt Catherine came as well, weeping throughout the ceremony, though whether from joy or shame I could not say. As I stood beside Adrian and spoke vows that would bind us for life, I thought of all the paths that had led to this moment. My father's ruin that had made me invisible to society. Iris's courage in choosing love over duty. Richard's terrible crime that had brought Adrian and me together again. And the cufflink, that small piece of evidence that had seemed to prove guilt, but instead had led to truth. We spent the first months of our marriage at Greystone Hall, away from London's gossip and judgment. Adrian taught me to ride properly, to manage the estate, to be not a duchess performing a role, but simply Eleanor, his wife and partner. We walked by the lake where he had once saved me from drowning, and I told him that he had saved me twice, once from water, once from a life half-lived. Spring came, and with it, news from London. George Green had published a series of articles about Iris's death, about love and class, and the violence that occurs when men believe they own women's choices. The articles caused a sensation. Society, always hungry for scandal repackaged as morality, embraced the story. And slowly, grudgingly, our marriage became not a scandal, but a romance, a tale of childhood love tested by circumstance and emerging triumphant. We returned to London that summer, to the townhouse Adrian had kept closed since his arrest. As we walked through rooms being opened and aired, I paused before a portrait of his mother, a woman I had never met but whose eyes held the same careful observation as her son. "Do you think she would have approved?" I asked. Adrian came to stand behind me, his arms circling my waist. "She would have loved you," he said simply. "She always told me to marry for love or not at all. She would be glad I finally listened." That evening we attended our first ball as husband and wife. There were stares, whispers, the cold shoulders of those who could not forgive my low status or his defiance of convention. But there were also smiles from unexpected places, congratulations from those who valued courage over custom. As we danced, Adrian leaned close and whispered, "Are you happy, Eleanor? Truly happy?" I looked up at him, at the man who had waited 5 years, who had faced death, who had knelt before me in a servant's parlor and offered me everything. "I am home," I said. "Finally, after so long wandering, I am home." And as the music swirled around us and London's elite watched with their complicated mix of judgment and envy, I understood that Iris had been right. Love was worth any sacrifice, worth disgrace, worth scandal, worth everything society might take away. Because in the end, love was the only thing that could not be stolen, could not be destroyed by circumstance or class or even death itself. We danced until midnight, and when we left the ballroom, it was not as Duke and Duchess, not as man and wife by society's definition, but as Eleanor and Adrian, two people who had found each other across impossible distance and refused to let go. The shadows of Mayfair had held many secrets. Murder and betrayal, yes, but also love patient enough to wait, courage strong enough to fight, and hope resilient enough to survive even the darkest night. And in the end, that was the truth worth defending. Not just Iris's memory or Adrian's innocence, but the simple, radical idea that love matters more than anything else this cruel, beautiful world can offer.